Well, Glenn, I am really, really excited to have you on. I'm really excited about this conversation. It's not a conversation that has been the highlight of a podcast episode before. We've had different people on that have brought it up in passing. But why don't you give yourself a rough introduction of who you are, what you're about, where you're from, just so people have a rough idea of who you are.
Okay. My name's Glen Graham, and I'm hitting the prime of my life. I'm going to be 50 at the end of the year, which is the second half of my life when stuff really starts to happen. As you can see, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah.
I'm still in the church system. I'm a Baptist minister. I have been for about 20 years. I do odd bits of spiritual directing for people, mainly ministers who are really shifting in their faith positions, deconstructing their faith. It's amazing how many folk in ministry are going about this. They don't want, like me, they don't want to leave the church as such, but they feel that the faith they started with and even into, we'll get that interrupting, the faith they began ministry with is not the faith that they have now. And so they just need somebody alongside them to help them realize that that's okay and that you can actually get out the other side intact and with integrity. So I do a bit of that. And I also, within the Baptist Union, I advise our Baptist churches on things to do with disability within the churches, particularly to do with attitudes. We'll come on to that later. And I'm also chair of a network of Christian charities and churches called Churches for All, which is, as it says on the tin, a church where able-bodied and people with disabilities can work together and will work together to do the stuff that we've been called to do. In other words, bring the love of Christ to everyone, and that everyone can be used in that wonderful task of showing what love is. So that's so the network is about campaigning for that. I'm a North Countryman originally, from the sort of Lake District part, but I find myself in exile in Devon, in mid-Devon.
You've got about as far low as you could go there, Glenn.
Well, I've been lower. I've been in Wales. No, sorry, that's. But, yeah, you can't get further. What a beautiful place to be in exile, I tell you.
Yeah, well, a lot warmer, that's for sure.
Oh yes, yeah, a lot warmer.
So, Glenn, first of all, before we kind of dive into all the meat and nitty gritty of a lot, I want to hear about your journey. I want to hear about your story. But I've got to ask first and foremost, because about 65-70% of my audience are in America, and they will hear you say, "Oh, I'm a Baptist ordained minister. I've deconstructed a bit of my faith. I'm helping other ministers who are going through deconstruction," and they're going to be scratching their head, going, "What are you talking about?" Because in my experience, the UK and a lot of the rest of the world, when compared to America, is a lot less black and white in its kind of denominations. My dad was a Baptist pastor, so I know this. He was a Pentecostal Baptist pastor. So, and when I say that to Americans, they're scratching their head as well. So could you maybe talk about the dynamics of, I don't know if you know a lot about the different dynamics of how Baptists are different in the UK to America, but could you kind of give a bit of a primer so that people kind of understand where you're coming from, that you're not necessarily a Southern Baptist from, Kentucky or something. It's going to be quite a different kind of picture in their heads.
Okay, I mean, obviously, all Baptists came out of the Baptist movement in Holland, so it all starts in Amsterdam during the Reformation, that groups of believers gathered in coffee houses originally because they felt that Baptist, the baptizing of people by full immersion was the way to do it. They also felt that actually the way you run a group of Christians, a church of Christians, is from the bottom up. So it's a congregational style. Sure. So that was sweeping through the sort of Low Countries. not so much in Germany, but certainly in the Netherlands. And one or two very British pastors went and spent some time in Holland, including one guy by the name of Thomas Helwys, who was the first person who got into trouble in the 17th century, who wrote a letter to the king about religious liberty. And he wasn't a liberal by any means. He was quite conservative in his theology. But he did say that whether you're a Turk, in other words, a Muslim or an atheist or whatever you are, you've got the right to be wrong. And that right should be enshrined in religious liberty. And that set the tone, really, for Baptist life to come. We're a people who believe in baptism, of believers, who do believe in mission. But our basis, we don't have a creed. So English Baptists don't have a set of creeds. Oh yes, there are historic ones, but we have what they call a declaration of principle instead, which is just sort of three statements. One is that it's up to you baptize of believers. The other is mission to go into the world. The first one, which I think is really important, is sole and absolute authority in all matters of faith and practice is through Jesus Christ, as revealed in the scriptures, and it's up to each local congregation, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, to determine God's laws. Now, that clause is quite important. First of all, it's making a very deliberate statement. It's saying Jesus, not the scriptures, are the final authority. That distinction is being made. Jesus trumps the scriptures. Sorry, maybe I watch off that word trump comes up, doesn't it? Jesus trumps the scriptures in the sense that they are his servant. They reveal him. They witness to him. They point to him, but they are not him. And Jesus is above them in terms of theology, in terms of everything. He is the supreme, Colossians says, all in all and all that. He's head of the scriptures. The scriptures serve him. That's a very important thing. So in British Baptist life, it's always been very historic. It was a coming together of two distinct denominations in about the 19th century. So it created a very broad church, and it always has been. And so if you were looking around today in British Baptist life, for our American guys, there's a Baptist denomination called the Co-Operative Baptists. There's also the Alliance of Baptists. We're probably more in line with those. The Southern Baptists, even the most conservative British Baptist would be liberal to a Southern Baptist, if I'm truly honest. And of course, the Southern Baptists years ago left the Baptist World Alliance just after the Iraq War, because the Baptist World Alliance refused to support the Iraq War. Southern Baptists did support the Iraq War, and so they said, "Oh, stuff you! We're not going to have anything to do with any of the rest of you." And they took all their missionary money with them and starved all sorts of European Baptist unions of mission funds simply on the basis of not supporting the Iraq War.
Wow!
So, in terms of our attitude, British Baptists, it's Christ-centered, not Bible-centered in that sense. And the interpretation is open to different congregations. So you can quite conceivably have a conservative Baptist church in one town and a liberal one in the next village, and we still all come together. We all have our disagreements, but we still live under this declaration of principle, which every minister signs, stating that whatever happens, Jesus is the authority. Scripture is Jesus' servant, is Jesus' witness. And
that's very interesting.
That's the basis we go on.
Oh, thank you.
Does that help?
My dad is a Baptist, or was a Baptist pastor. He's long moved on, but from that position and job, but I didn't know that. So there we go. So I grew up in that world. I grew up in the Baptist church. My dad was a Baptist pastor, and I didn't know the various steps along the way that has caused that. But hopefully that's helped people, because I found that when I went to America, that most people associate that term Baptist very much with maybe a couple of denominations within Baptist movement, but generally speaking, Southern Baptist. And it was a shock to them for me to say, "Oh yeah, my dad's a Baptist pastor, and he's a charismatic," and they were just like flabbergasted. They couldn't put two and two together. And I understand that now, knowing what the average Southern Baptist believes. I can understand why they were shocked that a Baptist pastor would be a charismatic. Awesome. So Glenn, how did you get to where you are today then? So because I presume you haven't always been a Baptist pastor, and you haven't always been in a position to be helping and assisting Baptists or pastors and ministers in their evolving or devolving faiths. So how did you get to where you are? Did you always grow up wanting to be a minister? Did you grow up in the church?
That's a very interesting question, which I did and I didn't. My mother came to faith at some stage. My grandmother always went to church, and so if she was looking after me, she'd take me. And I remember being fascinated by just the place. I can't see anything, by the way. Perhaps we should have said that right from the start. I'm totally blind. All I have is day and night, dark and light perception. Right, that's all I have. But I remember going into church buildings and while my grandmother was tending the graves outside, I was like 5 or 6, I'd stand in the pulpit and pretend I was delivering the thing. So there was obviously something that fascinated me about that way of life. That's all it was. It was just this sort of, but there must have been some sort of sense of the spiritual, there was some of those sort of buildings, that sort of ethos. It just generally fascinated me. I was a sort of child that was a bit odd, very into books. Well, I wasn't useless on a sports pitch, but let's put it this way, I was reading philosophy when I was 13. You don't get much more weird than that, do you? But I was always an inquisitive child, and I always knew there was something just beyond the mere survival, the mere existence of the moment. I thought nothing of it. I went on and off to church. When I was like 13, my mother started going more often, and she had what she would call a conversion experience. She'd been an alcoholic to the point where she made us very nervous about that. And there was a change in her life, and I went to church with her for a while, which was the Church of Scotland. I lived in Edinburgh for a bit. We lived in Edinburgh for a bit. But I thought I want to carry on going to church, but I don't want to go to her church because I want to go somewhere by myself where I have my own friends. I went to the
teenage
local
rebellion,
church.
Right? That would be my
teenage
kid.
rebellion was just not going to the same church as she went to. I went to a charismatic one instead. Oh, wow. And I went to this Church of Scotland place, which was just about 100 yards from the house, and they welcomed me and everything else. And they that's when the journey of faith really began. I remember cornering the minister and I said, right, I've played in your music group. I played the clarinet and the saxophone. So I've played in your music group. I've come to your things. I've sat, listened to your stuff. And there's loads of us in this building, isn't there? Right? Why the heck do we do it? What's it all about? I mean, it's a nice thing to do, but there's more to it, isn't it? Because these people are talking like there's more to it. And he said, yes. And he spoke to me about, Jesus being a heavenly parent and all this sort of stuff, and God and Jesus seeing and all that kind of thing. And if you really want to get connected with God, repent, believe, bloody, bloody, blah. And so I sort of did. That, and certainly experienced something of God. So it will be. Let me think. About 10 days' time will be my 35th anniversary of that. Wow. So I became a follower of Jesus at a time when this particular church was going through quite a significant period of renewal, we'll call it that. Very gentle, charismatic renewal for those, with the pastor of this church had become very connected with John and Carol Wimber.
Okay, wow.
So this is the early days of Wimber in Britain. And, we'd have these evening meetings, the sermon was given, and we'd immediately go into a time of silence. And you could tell the place was just electric with the Holy Spirit. Very quiet, but we're all moved to pray and prophesy and do all this kind of business. it was a very gentle, non-manipulative work. Having said that, there was always the pressure on those of us who had a disability to be healed, which was interesting. But, you know, I just went with the flow. Might it happen? Might it not happen? I don't know. So I passed all my exams and went to do my my advanced A levels and everything else. And then I went to Swansea University in the early 90s to do political philosophy and history. So hence I can ramble on about all these sort of things for hours. That's what I did my degree in. Right. And I went to a Baptist church then, a very Calvinistic Baptist church, it has to be said. Right. The teaching was great, but I was taught to undo all my naughty charismatic stuff. We were a very excellent Bible teaching, a fairly accepting church. I have to say, they swept me up and all the rest of it. And I was baptized in 91. And stop me if I'm going on too much.
No, this is great. I've
got baptized in the morning.
Coming from this, I'm making notes of things I want to go back to.
I was baptized in the morning. And then the evening, I can't for the life of me remember what the sermon was about. But the last hymn was introduced, an old hymn called "O Love That Will Not Let Me Go," which was written by a Church of Scotland minister called George Matheson. Now, George Matheson happened to be blind. Oh, wow. And so his biography was being told from the front, and as clear as anything, something in my head said, "You're going to become a minister." Wow. And I'm not accustomed to hearing voices. And they say, "You're going to become a minister." So I went back home to Edinburgh that Christmas, and I met with my Church of Scotland minister. I said, I've been baptized, as you know, and I'm thinking about a call to ministry. I said, do I do my university degree, come and join the Church of Scotland? Do I join the Baptists? He said, whatever you do, don't join the Church of Scotland. So that's fine. You're one of them. You don't endorse it. That's enough for me. So I joined the Baptist Church and did my bit and served them and did all sorts of fun, voluntary stuff. Oh, yes, I did a degree as well in my spare time. I passed that. And then seen the moment to do ministry. So I spent a year as a sort of intern in the church. And then I went off to the Baptist College in Bristol, which happens to be the oldest three-church college in the world. It was established in 1679. So before William of Orange and all this sort of stuff, way before all of that. Probably during the time of the Catholic kings. This non-conformist college was started in somebody's front room, first of all, front parlour in Bristol, and then it obviously expanded. And I remember my minister sending me off and saying, well, it's quite a liberal college, so what I suspect you do is just take enough what you need to learn, ignore the rest. Try and evangelize everybody, keep your nose clean, which is exactly what I did. I don't know, I sort of developed a bit of a thick skin towards what I was being taught. Right. I did ignore it. And then ended up I ended up getting a church, but it took years to do it. Wow. And this was my first exposure to institutionalized ableism. Yeah. Because, which I had an apology for, actually. To be fair, I did have an apology from them. But in your final year at college, you go on a list for vacant churches. So that was October 97. It took until February 2000 to get placed. Wow. And I know that I was being sent, Duff nominations. The papers were just going in the bin unread. Wow. Because it was assumed that somebody who was blind couldn't be a minister. But years later, when I became a fully accredited minister, my area the regional minister, who then became the general secretary of the Baptist Union, apologised on behalf of all his colleagues in saying, we behaved towards you appallingly. Wow. And as an institution, we treated you very badly. So I did receive an apology about that, which was great. And so, yes, I served three churches. I went into the first church. You make all the notes. I'll tell the story. I will read. The first church I went in as this conservative 29-year-old know-it-all. And I thought, right, I'm going to turn you lot. But I ended up they were a really loving crowd. They were very, very open. And they taught me that love trumps doctrine. Wow. What you believe, that love gets greater results. And when I think of what I did to these poor people, what I put these poor people through, it's absolutely dreadful. But they were very gracious. One guy who became, in the end, started out as one of my nemesis, but then became one of my closest friends. Who, I don't know if I believe in the Trinity. He said, I don't know if I believe in this and that and the other, and he pushed back at me every time. And in the end, I became very grateful, because despite all that pushback, I never met a more loving, generous person. I thought, hang on a minute, he believes all the wrong stuff. But yet he's more spiritual than me, who believes all the right stuff. But because they ran out of money and it was an isolated place, and I got married, you know what happens, you double the people in the household, you double the income, and you need them. So I moved to a city parish in Plymouth. And it should have been my greatest dream. Conservative church, loved scripture, loved Bible teaching, everything else. About 2 years in, 2 years in, a spiritual crisis happened. We'll come. From day one, I felt as miserable as sin. I mean, I loved them. I loved the people. I can't say I loved the city much. It wasn't my sort. I'm a country person.
Right. Yeah, me too.
But I gave them 8.5 years. This was a church that was very divided amongst themselves. I gave them 8.5 years of, for whatever happens, I'm going to love you to bits, even if it kills me. And it very nearly did kill me.
So why were you so miserable going in?
Well, I don't know. I'd say it was the stirring of the Lord.
Yeah.
Because, I soon discovered I didn't like the area very much.
Right.
That was the end of 2005. I woke up one morning in July 2007. Now, I was your traditional conservative evangelical, doing his quiet time. Do I need to explain what that is?
No, yeah, I think most people have had that experience.
Most folks are wounded by this concept.
A lot of people just had major triggering moments there.
Triggering moments.
That's it.
It wasn't a triggering moment. I just woke up and thought, actually, this is pants.
That's funny.
It wasn't that it was triggered. It was like, this is boring. It was just plain boring. I love it. The Bible had become boring. Prayer had become boring. It all become boring. And I thought, what do I do about this? I knew a friend who was a very liberal Baptist minister, but it was also very into Celtic Christianity.
Right.
And we were on the same committee, so I buttonholed this poor fella. I said, you know what? I said, I'm desperate, and you're the only person who can help me. I need a spiritual director pretty quick. And he said, well, I like you. Come and meet with me. And he gave me a copy. So I went along and told him my story. He said, yeah, you do need rescuing, my friend. He said, I think you'd be excited by another way. So he handed me a book called Celtic Daily Prayer, which is a book by, have you ever come across the Northumbria community?
No.
Is that familiar to you? Which I'm a member of. It's a dispersed community who live by a rule of life, of vulnerability and availability to God and others in the Celtic tradition. So we have studied a Celtic saints, a bit into all of that, contemplative prayer and all that kind of stuff. And it just opened me up to a world of imagination, because I was used to be a very imaginative child. And so reading this, and I followed the daily office, and the language was rich. And it had this sort of edge about it that says, uncertainty is the way to go. It spoke about faith as an adventure. It spoke about uncertainty. And I thought, actually, that's what I want to be uncertain. I actually want this adventure, this open-ended, this adventure. I read about people like Patrick and Aidan of Lindisfarne and what's he called? Iona. It's gone. Whoever him.
Columbus.
And all these guys who went all over the country for God, having all these wonderful experiences of things, and really connecting with God in a very imaginative way. So I learned that. I learned how to read the Bible imaginatively, like the Ignatian stream. I'm very into this sort of contemplative stream of Christianity. I find myself in that sort of landscape. So putting yourself in the stories, imagining the Bible stories, in a sort of meditative way, and all that sort of stuff brought my prayer to life. But once my prayer life had come to life, once I'd settled for the fact of I want an adventure, God takes you His word. and one of the things that when I became a novice of the community, joined the Northumbria community, and on the day you do make vows annually. I don't mind being bound to that. It's a very loose binding. It's an intentional saying, this is where my life's going to go. How you get there doesn't really matter. But my the way I want to live my life is vulnerability and availability to God and others. And I will open myself to all sorts of things.
Wow.
So we studied the rule of life. And in the rule of life of the Northumbria community is a commitment to something called the Heretical Imperative. In other words, you commit yourself to being a heretic.
Wow.
What it actually means is that you're open to learning from anybody. That's what the Heretical Imperative means. It means to be teachable enough to be open to anybody from all traditions and none, and to be hospitable to them in their ideas, in your mind, in your heart, as well as hospitality in your home. And that phrase heretical imperative just jumped out at me, because I thought, well, yeah, actually, I'm on a journey here. And you commit yourself to that, to break new ground for God. Little did I know that was going to open the floodgates to a major period of questioning everything. Original sin. I mean, of course, the Celts were traditionally Pelagian. Yeah, there you go. Original goodness and all that. Original blessing. So I looked at that. I looked at, all these, all sort of the major pillars of things started to crumble.
Wow.
Because I really started looking at my Baptist roots and saying, right, if you believe that Jesus is the sole and absolute authority of everything, what does that mean when you've been saying all these years you think Scripture is the sole and absolute authority?
Yeah.
So first of all, I had to realize what I meant by Scripture. What does Scripture mean to me? And I came to the conclusion that Scripture is certainly divine. It is also human. I was very influenced by Karl Barth, anyway. Latterly, that the Word becomes the Word through the inspiration of the Spirit. That's his idea. Really boiled down. That as the Word is opened up and spoken, and it happens, something happens to it through all sorts of other means, and it is a chronicle of people groping after how do we understand this thing called God.
Yeah,
it's a book about how people get it wrong and how people get it right, and how people understand it, and God sweeps that up into this book that says, right, here's a sort of roadmap for you to go. But it's a sort of map you can do something with.
Yeah.
Like in some sort of quest, you can take the map, but let the map lead you to where the map will and where you want to go. So, for me, scripture became this living adventure book, this story of liberation. But it told the story from winners and losers' points of view. It's from good and bad. It wasn't to be taken flatly. It was to be taken as it was.
Yeah.
As it
How
was.
did you find that journey? Like for a lot of people, that's a huge shift for most Christians to kind of go from that position to the other. And probably for a lot of people, it's not an overnight change. It's kind of a gradual kind of whittling away and reevaluating. But on an emotional level, how did you process that? Was that quite a hard process? Was that quite hard for you to accept, or was you quite excited about it?
No, I was excited by it because I did not like the notion. You see, you imbibe things, you take things in church life, and you accept it, but you sometimes bypass bits of yourself while you're doing so. There's bits of yourself that you suppress, but you don't realize that you suppress it. Like somewhere along the line, as I say, I was very imaginative. I'd make up stories and tell people stories when I was a child, bore people to death. That was something that was completely natural to me. I wasn't taught it. It was just something I did. So there was always that sort of sense of being in another world. The idea that this thing was just like rules or a code of living or whatever, or a collection of beliefs. And it's taken me a long time to discover the bits I bypassed. So in other words, initially was excitement. Yes, this isn't, this Bible actually opens me up to all sorts of adventures and all sorts of wonderful possibilities.
Yeah.
But what I've only just recently realized is that even during my conservative days, dotting every I, and I remember a friend and I nearly got arrested in Birmingham outside a Kenneth Copeland event, trying to stop folk going in. I hated the prosperity gospel.
Wow.
But anyway, where was I? You baptize, you bypassing everything. Even during my doctrinaire days, I only did it because I wanted close union.
Right.
It's only taken me to about 18 months ago to realize that actually everything I did, I suppose that's the reconstruction part, isn't it? You don't realize it at the time. Maybe you're not meant to. I don't know. But I think the first seeds of reconstruction was I realized that everything I did, when I got beyond the cringing part, how could I possibly believe that? And the anger and the angst. I think I realized I was coming out the other side when I realized that actually everything I did, the motive was union with God and get as much of God's love energy in to get to flow it out. So that was always the intention. I went about it the wrong way. I thought I could earn it. You teach about grace, but you don't live out grace, and you got that sort of separation, that divide in your heart. But I realized actually that the core thing that had held it all together was a desire for intimacy in order to flow it out to other people. So yes, it was excitement, but yet, as I say, you bypass parts of yourself. But once the scriptures had started to become exciting, I then remembered that there were other ways to look at other things. I did remember the stuff I'd been taught and been in my college year. So once I started reading John's Gospel and the Sermon on the Mount, particularly, once I started reading the scriptures through a lens of, if it looks like Jesus, it's right. If it doesn't, bin it. Then things like an angry God needing to be appeased by the honor killing of his own son, if that isn't putting it too strongly.
No, I think that sums up a lot of people's theology pretty well.
Can't be consistent. It might be there. I think you can tweak it to something which something towards what a mystical writer called Charles Williams. Have you ever come across Charles Williams?
No, I haven't. No.
He's the forgotten Inkling. The Inkling Society, Tolkien and Lewis. There was also Charles Williams. Charles Williams was mainly a poet, but he was a mystic. And he spoke about substitutionary love, where you still have a substitutionary aspect of it, but it was a willing thing. Jesus willingly offered himself as the forgiving victim, or however you want to frame it. It's to carry a burden that others don't need to carry, but we could share in. So you still could get that substitution bit, but it wasn't to appease something, because I was told a story by a rabbi recently that he'd been at a meeting where the story of Isaac being sacrificed by Abraham came up, and they came up with about all this sort of stuff of, it was noble. Isaac was offered so that as a foretaste of Jesus, and this rabbi said, I had to say no. In our tradition, no one can offer the life of another. It has to be willingly offered.
Yeah.
So actually, that then raises questions: did Isaac willingly volunteer himself? Maybe that's an interesting question. Don't know the answer to that. Just leave that one hanging. But if that's the case, and in some rabbinic traditions that is the case, then the father couldn't offer his son. The son had to offer.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean by this is a substitute. So there is an aspect to that in it, but it's love that's being substituted.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I've heard it said about Isaac. I've heard quite a few scholars say that Isaac probably would have been at the earliest, maybe like early 20s, right through to maybe mid to late 30s. And you think about Abraham at that time being well gone 100. And you can't hear the story with those two dates in mind without thinking, Isaac had to be on some level kind of a willing participant in this, right? Because I don't see a 20-something-year-old getting overpowered by a 115-year-old. Like, it just doesn't seem a likely dynamic.
No.
And so, but then, you have that picture of father and son working together in some sort of dynamic. If it is a picture of Jesus, it's a different picture than father tricking son into being slain for, like what a very twisted way to perceive it.
And it's very un-Trinitarian.
Very much so. It's
so if you then you've got to look at the Trinity in a new way, you see. So if you've got the Father and the Son working, then you've got the flow between Father, Son, and Spirit. I love the picture of the Rublev. We're going back to Abraham again. The Rublev icon of the strangers beckoning Abraham into the circle.
Yes,
the encircling presence of their presence, as perhaps being the Trinity, inviting Abraham into its essence, and therefore the Trinity inviting us into its essence, into the very essence of God. The stuff of godliness is truly wonderful. So, then you start seeing the Trinity in a very vibrant light. And then you see your, whatever salvation is, liberation. Let's call it liberation. Yeah. Your liberation becomes something then very different, because you're not just saved for heaven, you participate in the substance of this divine flow. And then you start thinking, and what about heaven and hell? And then you've got to come to the conclusion, well, if God doesn't behave in these other areas, why would he behave in that area? The Santa Claus God is checking his list twice. He knows who's naughty and nice. He knows when you've been weak. Santa Claus is coming into town is the most powerful song about what people's beliefs are, isn't it? Then another inconsistency comes. So you end up, well, I've either got to believe in a schizoid God who is divided, but then that's not Trinitarian.
Yeah.
So if God is Trinity, and I think that's the most beautiful picture there is. Can't get rid of that. If God is truly Trinity, that's such a strong Celtic vibe too. If God is Trinity, then all of Trinity is goodness, all of Trinity is life-giving, and therefore all in all must be all in all. So I end up in this position now where my faith is very different, but this was all going on in a conservative church.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you go about navigating this as the leader of a church? I mean, even if it wasn't in a conservative church, I mean, a lot of churches still would struggle with such a shift in change in their leader.
Just preach on the Gospels.
How did you go through that? You just went through the Gospels?
just preach Jesus, mainly. And when I came here, this church is a much more rural church. They're loving folk, lovely folk, very uncomplicated faith. I took them through the Sunday school materials for the first 4 years, went literally through the Bible, modeling how you read it through Jesus lenses. You got the history, but in the end, you got to read it through the Jesus lens.
Yeah.
So how do we get Jesus into this? And so I did it through doing. I sort of like exercising my demons, so to speak, was actually doing that series. Was actually, playing it out before them. So that was a way of doing it. That was the way of doing it. Yeah, going to a new church and modeling a whole new way of reading the scriptures.
Wow. Gosh, that's quite the journey. That is quite the journey, Glenn. And it feels like you sound a little like, even when you were saying I'm reading philosophy at 13 as a kid. Now, I'll put my hand up and say I wasn't reading philosophy at 13 by any means, but I've always been someone that likes to have a bit of an existential crisis. If I can find one, I'll hunt it out. I'll hunt out a new idea or a new thing that
I'm like that.
And I do think people that are like that tends to navigate a deconstruction a lot easier. It's still not necessarily easy, but I think it's at least on the existential level a little bit easier to navigate, because that's something that often we enjoy. I think
we lose, for some people it's a two-edged sword. You've got the relationships you lose, and you've got the things that you believe that you lose. If you're an adventurer, which of course I woke up to the fact that I was, actually losing things and gaining things, you've actually got to stop yourself doing it. There's almost a temptation to just seek new things. You've got to watch that, but you don't have the investment. The stuff was precious, but you could get rid of it. It's easy enough to get rid of, really. But the relationships that you invested in, they're still costly.
Could we start? Can we almost rewind quite early and then maybe work through a few different things? There's a couple of things that you said that I'm like, I'm just so fascinated. So I was very involved in the charismatic church for many years. I was involved in the church, in different church leaderships. I traveled and spoke in well over probably 400 or 500 charismatic churches over a few years. So very involved in the charismatic church. And in my experience, not every charismatic church is as active in their beliefs as others, but it's become even more popular today for people to be really very, quote unquote, activated in their beliefs. You go and heal the sick. You go and prophesy. Everyone can prophesy. Everyone can heal the sick. Everyone can speak in tongues. That kind of like, it's not just for the people up on the stage, it's everyone. But what was it like? So for me, I've seen friends with different disabilities. One I can think of in particular has hearing aids. It's a very visual, obvious signpost. It's like walking into a building with a cast on or something. It's very, everyone immediately knows, oh, this person has a disability. And And the temptation was for people around them to automatically go, well, this is my opportunity to be a good Christian. I'll go and lay hands on them, pray for them.
Yep.
Often people didn't even ask. They would, some people would lick their finger and stick it in his ear because, well, I mean, Jesus did that, right? Or, I don't know how the connections that people make as far as what we look at as consent and things. But what was your experience? Obviously, this is one of your first experiences in church, one of your earliest experiences in church. And I don't know what the charismatic church was like back then in the Church of Scotland. I'm sure everyone was quite unique. But what was your experience as a blind person in an atmosphere where people were constantly seeking healing? And how did you process that on an internal level? Like, what did that teach you? Maybe even subconsciously, maybe not people were explicitly teaching, but what was going on? I guess I'm asking a question that's got about 12 different branches to it. But can you talk a bit about that?
In those early days, it wasn't so much a problem in that healing was in the background, but it wasn't the major thing.
Right.
So on a week-by-week basis, no, it wasn't an issue, to be fair. It was only years later, really, when I went to Baptist college and various things. I'd go to other people's charismatic churches, and that's when that is really when it became an issue.
Right.
I've had spit in my eyes. I've had the attempts to exorcise the demon of blindness out of it.
Right.
Unwarranted prayer. Breathing, blowing, all sorts of circles of people, all with their hands around you, almost pushing you down with a heavy weight, knowing they have got expectations of me.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And nothing did. Knowing I couldn't care less one way or the other.
Right.
So it started out, might as well. Let's just, whatever, horses for courses. Until you start getting the pushback, well, it's not, it's your fault. You're not walking in it.
Wow.
There's something you must be doing to stop that. To stop that happening. And it's my fault, is it? That then got ramped up when I visited a place where with a friend, and we were praying. Obviously there were going to be. I knew somebody's going to pounce. What I wasn't expecting was the person running a meeting. They say, "Well, you're going into ministry." Well, of course, you can't.
Wow.
I said, "Why?" Because in Leviticus it says,
"Oh my God,"
about the imperfection of blind priests. So you will be cursing the congregation.
Wow.
Everywhere you go, you will be a curse. Wow. That ain't good news.
Yeah, that's a twist of the gospel, that's for sure.
But somewhere in that moment, you think, is he right?
Wow.
Because that person's older than me. And of course, my brain, you get a grip, Graham, total rubbish. But in that moment, you thought, what? Am I really that disgusting? Am I really that contagious? Am I really going to give somebody something or other? Am I really going to be that devastating to a group of people? And then you're open to that world of, well, if it isn't you that's caused it, it might be your parents who've caused it, and it might be demons that have caused it.
Yeah. Gosh.
And that would just keep reappearing. I mean, in my first church, I had somebody who offered to help us as an evangelist, who befriended me. And then who was so caught up in demonology. Every malfunction was to do with a demon. So, I always seem to attract these people who attracted these people who wanted to be their experiment.
Yeah, gosh, wow.
And so you become, then there's so work on you. Did you do start wondering what's lurking somewhere? So what started with about the eyes and things starts out other things, other character traits. Is that caused by that?
Wow.
Is depression caused by demons? They get in your head and all your mind, very well. But you become divided. They divide you. That's the sort of subtlety that these folk that can do it in such a gentle way. They divide your person.
Yeah. Did you find in these kind of environments, and I don't know, obviously I don't know all the hosts of the different types of people that spoke to you and different what situations they were in, but I to draw a parallel, and it's probably not the best parallel, but I know growing up, for example, as a teenager. Now I'm a male and I'm a teenager and I'm in the church. We all know what every single youth group was about. It was about porn, masturbation, lust. It's just constant. It was all that the leaders ever taught me or talked about, and it was consistently hammered in. Well, if you look at women with lust, you've got a evil thing going on, or there's something deeply wrong with you deep down, and I'm not saying that there are not very unhealthy expressions of one's sexual libido. There are. But generally speaking, a teenager just has a very high sexual libido. And what that did was it internalized a lot of, it made me do some deep introspection where I probably wouldn't have done. Maybe that might be a good thing sometimes to do some introspection, but it made me dig up stuff I don't even think was there at times. And I started to find things that, but I think the biggest narrative. So my point in saying this is this is my only kind of, I think it's the only way I can kind of say I've had an experience that's in the same vein. I mean, it's really not, but you understand that I'm grasping at straws to experience something similar. What's interesting to me was I think the biggest thing that I found hard about that was there was no one ever stood up and said, "Hey, Phil, it's normal to have a sex drive. Don't let that eat away at you." Were there advocates in these experiences that you had where people almost demonized, well, literally demonized your disability? Were there advocates that said, "Hey, listen, man, that's not because you've got a secret sin. That's not because you don't have enough faith."
Yeah.
You did have that?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Fortunately.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah,
mind you, it's interesting. You can always edit this out. Going down another sideline, it's amazing how many folk ask you as a blind person, "How do you do it? Sex?"
No, you're welcome to go.
Do you have a sex drive? Because you can't see. You surely won't have the same degree of lusts and things. I said, well, I know what a pretty woman sounds like. I've got an imagination. Put two and two together, you'll get the same answer. It's amazing the sort of myths that go around, and you've just brought one to mind.
Yeah, no, it is. I tell you, I complete rabbit trail down here now. But I remember about 3 years ago, I often frequent Reddit. It's a website on the internet, and they have a Ask Me Anything every now and again. Someone will come on and say, "I'm a fire marshal that works in 9/11 and went up the two towers. Ask me anything," and they answer people's questions. And one time, someone came on and said, "I'm legally blind. Ask me anything." And one of the questions were things like, "Oh, can you have sex?" or "How are you even using this website?" And things like that. And I was astonished at how ignorant I was, or how many things I had assumed that were totally wrong, things like that. And so someone was like, "Well, do you watch porn?" or things like that. And they went, "Well, visually, that's, porn soundtracks are not made for the blind, believe it or not." But, and he went into the different details of what were stimulating. And I was like, "Of course, actually, of course, things like smell or sound, or, we're a very complex thing." And I guess, everything we find stimulating is contextual anyway. You know, you go into a different culture and they might not even find the things that we find visually stimulating to be the same visual things, you know. And so it fascinates me. It fascinates me when we're not exposed to these worlds, we don't think about them. I think that's the big thing, and it's kind of understandable. You can't think about every single thing on the planet, but it causes a lot of problems.
I'm finding this quite a challenge at the moment with the whole business of George Floyd.
Right.
I'm in the middle of reading a book, and I can't remember who it's by. I couldn't pronounce it if I did, called Me and White Supremacy.
Okay.
And it's a 28-day study, even Bible study on racism. And it takes you, she is from a Muslim background and from East Africa. And it takes you into a world, and it's, I mean, I've only just done day one, you know. We're doing it as a group of us are doing it as a group, and you're just entering the world of another. It is a very uncomfortable place to be.
Yeah.
And what you need is the other person to give you the room to make errors. So when it comes to the disability world, you know, folk wanting to enter that world, as I want folk to do, I want people to enter that world knowing they're going to make mistakes, but being comfortable with making mistakes. So creating the environment where they can be safe and say the politically incorrect things, and yet being teachable enough to say, well, actually, this is not right because of something or other. So it is hard to, isn't it, to inhabit the world of another, but we must. If we're going to grow as individuals, we need to inhabit a variety of worlds simultaneously.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So something that I find interesting is there's a lot of areas in which racism is probably a great example where if you look across, I mean, America's on the grand stage right now. I'm reading a fantastic book called what is it called? It's called Black and British. I'm listening to it actually on audiobook, and it's 25 hours long. It is in depth, and it goes through the whole history of it. But America's on the main stage right now, so maybe it's an interesting place to look at because it's a place of such extremes and such dualisms. But what's fascinating to me when we talk about racism is in the American culture, it feels that the most outspoken in their Christianity are on the wrong side of this conversation. And it feels that for some reason there's something about Christianity, and maybe it is the idolatry of biblicism, of the Bible being the word, you know, it holds people back because it's rooted in a backwards time, in a previous time. And I don't know if that's entirely what it is or even part of what it is, but I wonder, do you have any thoughts on the differences that you've faced with ableism, I'm just going to elaborate on ableism, really, with problems with being someone with a disability in the church that is quite different to being someone with a disability in the average day-to-day culture in Britain where you are? Are those two different worlds to you, or are they largely intermingled and not much different?
That's a good question. They're intermingled yet different would be a very good description. What I find with the church, I mean, it depends on generations. I mean, it's such a complex onion when you start to unpeel it. What do you even mean by disability?
Yeah.
And there are two major ways of understanding it. One is purely on the medical grounds. So-and-so has a disease or an illness or a malfunction or whatever you want to call it, that either must be cured or managed. So that's called the medical model.
Right.
You cure, you fix, you manage. They're the sort of the key things that you do to this presenting problem. The social model is actually disability is not so much about the malfunction, disease, etc. It's about the fact that institutions, societies, and others have denied you equality or privilege. It's society that's caused the disability.
Right.
Now, obviously, people of certain generations will be very medically modelled, fixed. Those who are sort of younger than me are becoming more aware of the fact that it's society that's causing the problem. But the church operates, the latest theological thinking amongst academics will take about 50 years to catch on in the church. So they reckon. And it's the same with the world. The church is always on lag. So the church is still very much medically modelled. So a disability is something to be managed or cured or fixed in some way. So you have to solve the problem by either healing the person, which God may or may not do. But then you're raised with a huge theological issue that you're implying that the person is imperfect to start with.
Yeah.
Huge can of worms. So to heal somebody, particularly somebody who has been born with something, you are in effect saying this person was not fully human until the point of healing. At least that's how it comes across to me. That's how it came across to me when I started thinking through this stuff. You're saying somebody's less than a human unless they're mended or cured. Of course, assuming that doesn't work, then you've got to somehow manage the situation by putting in the right bits and pieces. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but you are merely managing one half of the coin. The other half of the coin is the fact that and this is where the church still aren't getting it, that there's something within the mechanics of church, the organization of church, flowing out of this medical understanding that then disables you twice. Because it then says, well, because we can't, we're managing you and you can't be fixed or mended. Managing you's enough. If we can manage you and you get some sort of benefit that makes you feel better, that's okay. We fulfilled our obligations.
Wow.
Where in actual fact, you're thinking, no, you haven't fulfilled my obligations because I want to participate in society.
Yeah.
Just the same as someone else. Now, the bridge, of course, between those things is what you could call a relational model, which sees everybody in the church as friends. Friendship is a very strong word. We are friends of Jesus. We are friends of one another. The friend, rather than leader and led. You see, even all that language: leader in charge, led not in charge.
Yeah.
Leaders are perfect. There's all sorts of unintended fallout. If we're a society of friends, to borrow the Quaker name, and I think at heart I actually am a Quaker.
That's lovely.
An Anabaptist Quaker. If the church really took itself seriously as a society of friends, literally, then everybody would be on equal terms, because friendship's the goal. Friendship with God, friendship with others. And I think we have to almost start thinking of, and there's still a lot of imagining that I need to do. And what actually does that look like? But you can see how, so the difference is, in answering your question, is that the world has problems, and because of austerity and because of now COVID, the problem that has been emerging in the last 8 years that had gone silent during the 90s, but it's re-emerged, like racism hasn't gone away, but it's re-emerged, is the vilification of disabled people. So, with austerity, it soon became, well, you are the cause, you're scroungers. You're the scroungers that are taking the taxpayers' money. You're the scroungers that do this and the other.
Yeah.
And so you become the other again.
Yeah.
Even if, and then somebody, you defend yourself and you see you're working and say, you must get support for that. So you're the people who are taking support. You can't win. You actually can't win. So the world is starting again to where it hadn't for a while. It's starting again to be a bit more. It's not such a great place as it was in some respect.
Yeah.
And I think the same is going to be true with COVID. I won't be able to keep the 2 meters distance. I haven't literally been beyond the end of my drive for 109 days now.
Wow.
I'll make my first foray in a week. Will folk respect that I can't respect their distance? Will people be nasty? And already I know that in some parts of Britain, people, blind and deaf people, are being bullied and hate crime because they're not keeping distance.
Wow.
The church, however, has carried on doing its thing in a very nice way. The best of them provide things for you to manage you. There are good practice stories, of course, and I think they're getting more of them.
Yeah.
But there's still underlying this fact that you are somebody to be managed, somebody to be mended or fixed, rather than somebody who's in partnership. But then that then raises the theology of the church. They see God as managing their sin. They see God as mending them so often, or fixing them or managing them. And then the idea that we are co-partners with God. I mean, look at the vine and the branches. Actually, what good's a vine without branches?
Yeah.
A vine can do nothing. Never mind the branches can do nothing without the vine. The vine can do diddly squat without the branches.
Yeah.
Funny when you think of it that way. So they've yet to learn the sort. If you haven't learned, if you're not modelling partner, no wonder churches don't get it, because I do take sessions on disability equality. But I take them in a particular way. I always start with the who is God question. I say where we're starting to get this wrong, where we get things wrong in every ism, whether it's homophobia, whether it's gender, whether it's race, we're getting it wrong as who we think God is. Because if you think God is this male Superman, perfectly minded, perfectly rippling muscles, sound of mind, everything else. If you see God in that way and you see perfection as falling below that, you will not then treat other people equally, because you're treating God in a very strange, twisted way. So I try and untwist their picture of God. And I use these models of disability actually to do it, because, as I say, you're in church, so ministers are managing your behavior and discipling you and programming you to fix you, to get you to this prototype. What means super Christian? The perfect Christian who's the member of the church, who's this, that, and the other. Whether they're realizing or not, that's what they're doing. They're medically modeling you. You're a 6 in a. So are they. So are we as leaders. But hey, we've had the training. We're guiding you. We're GPs get sick too, but we're GPs. We're doing the GP stuff. Actually, but we've lost the whole partnership, like body of Christ. We've got the idea of the body as being a skeleton with all its bits, but we haven't got the idea of body as a body of people, is a group of people, a partnership of people. So you use the word body differently. It's a collective. So we don't often teach about to collect. Well, we do in terms of gifts. Oh, there's another issue, but never mind. That's another us and them, isn't it? Once you've got God so other and so you untangle that mess, and then you start working on the disabled issue.
Yeah, I can see it's very I guess it goes right back to this kind of the kind of Platonic kind of concept of the perfect that we've fallen from, and so anything that isn't perfect is fallen. That kind of like Greco kind of duality that is kind of crept into Judeo-Christian faith. Really, I don't see it at its origin necessarily. I see it present and I see it around in the story, but when you read through the Jewish kind of story, it's not necessarily required. It's certainly not necessarily there in the story of Adam and Eve even, and
No.
yeah, I do wonder if it's possible to get beyond that without letting go of that belief that, well, there is the perfect standard and anything that is below it, and I see you having autism as below it, or you being deaf or blind, or that's below the perfect standard. Perfect standard would be you could see properly and you can hear properly and you can think properly and whatever properly, right? I mean, as defined by whoever is in power, I guess, ultimately, or whoever the majority and powerful are. But I don't see, it feels like that's a very big hurdle for the church to overcome without getting past that concept of this.
I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can do it fully, no.
Yeah.
I mean, other disabled Christians would disagree with me, and within the Baptist group, there's quite a bit of disagreement. It's about, as long as we model something different, then things will change. I've been very convinced, because I look at it in my own life. I entered this disability thing very reluctantly 9 years ago.
Right.
I was asked to take this on. And most of my life, disability has been a background thing. I would have been much happier doing something like race or gender inequality or something like that. I've always had a keen sense of justice and injustice. Sure. But I thought I was doing okay, and all the rest of it. But as I've been dragged into this thing, I've become absolutely convinced. The one thing, my college principal, he taught me a lot of things, and bless him, I've repented of the things I've ignored, and he's a dear friend. But the one thing he taught us was that your image of God determines absolutely everything. Absolutely everything. Every practice, every belief stems from what sort of God you believe in.
Yeah.
Every pastoral issue will have its practical outcomes. Of course it will. It needs practical techniques, practical therapies. But it won't all come together until you dethrone Zeus and replace him with Jesus. And it didn't work. That's what worked for me. That's how I've become comfortable, and I am very comfortable in my own skin. But it's taken me 48.5 years to do it. And I'd done all the, I know my identity and all the rest of it in Christ and that. But what had to really start that, what had to bring it together, was to dethrone what my thought God was, and see the real God. And the rest of it then started to work.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that's absolutely huge, and we see that in, I had a guy called Kevin Miller on, a few months ago now, and he just brought out a documentary. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he brought out a documentary. The name is fantastic. It's called JES USA, and it's about the conflation of American nationalism and violence with the Christian message. And we talked about this concept in that you will not be able to remove this using violence for a righteous cause until you lose the concept of a God who will use violence unto a righteous end. And it seems very similar. Like you can't, until you can get rid of these very fundamental notions that if it's okay for God, and who are we supposed to be in the image of? Who are we supposed to be replicating? Who are we supposed to be like? Well, surely we're trying to become more like this God. But the problem is, if the picture of God we're trying to become more like is racist or violent or ableist, then we have some serious issues because.
And my mentor through that sort of process was a guy called Michael Hardin.
Yes, I love Michael. He's a good friend.
Who's got a new book out, if I can plug. Knowing
it's
God.
Fantastic, yeah.
It's a great book about if your American audience really want to get a handle on, and that's not the J.I. Packer version, I must say, on the real handle on American evangelicalism, and I think we do well to read it in this country. Knowing God by Michael Hardin is something you must buy, particularly in the state that we're all in at the moment over there. A cheap plug, but he helped me to see the connections between violence, between our innate desire to other. Is more or less doesn't quite. It's much more sophisticated, but we suck rivalry off our mother's breast, sort of thing, don't we? It's somehow in our mother's milk. There is this. But bias is somehow built into us somewhere. Now, it can work for us and it can work against us. But there's something about that built in us that sort of, it's there, and it just needs all sorts of things to feed it. But this whole othering thing, and it does come from, if a God others you, then of course you'll other other people.
Yeah.
So he helped him and his writing and lectures and carry on helped me through an awful lot of that sort of process. And what with him and mysticism, they've been the sort of things that have really been the props that have enabled the new structure to emerge. And of course it feeds then into the disability stuff, about perfection, and about then the Bible as this savage text towards people with disabilities. I mean, that Leviticus passage, it's there. You can't argue. You cannot argue it's there, but you've got to interpret. You've got to interpret that away.
Yeah,
very easily. But there's other things. Other things the Bible raises. Why were all these people had to be healed first before they followed you?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the questions I'd like to ask Jesus. Why did you have to heal them first?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's in my understanding, and again, I'm not hugely exposed. I work from home, and I talk to disabled people online or something like that, but I don't go to a church anymore. And so, I've got a small set of group of friends. A couple have disabilities to probably quite minor degrees in the way that it affects their day-to-day living. And my family, I have some disability in that, but it's not a world I'm hugely immersed in, and have to work or spend time with people that have disabilities very often. I'm trying to think why I started this train of thought, but it seems to me that there's like you mentioned, the generational element of how maybe the younger generation are starting to kind of catch up with some of the newer academic thought of maybe the social kind of constructs of disability, as opposed to the medical constructs.
Yes.
Do you think? This is what I was going to say. Sorry. So the few disabled people I know, or people that are close to disabled people, because often disabled people can't speak for themselves. I think of my youngest brother. He can't express himself. He has a very severe mental disability, and so people like my dad or my sister, who are his primary carers, have to speak for him. There are different views, it seems, on the spectrum between those, the medical, the social. I'm thinking of the popular documentary that just came out on Netflix recently. It was called Crip Camp. Did you have? I don't know if it's got an audio description version. I'm not sure.
I haven't seen it.
It's fantastic. A documentary. I think it was produced by Barack and Michelle Obama. They've been funneling loads of money into very left-leaning social kind of justice kind of documentaries recently. But it was about a camp that was in the 60s, and it would bring disabled people with disabilities, I should say, to these summer camps. But they basically were given free reign. They weren't treated as any less than. They made the decisions. What are we going to do? What do you want? Yeah. They would like sit around and they'd smoke pot and play guitar. Like they were just given like free reign. It was very hippie driven. But that documentary followed the movement of the Disability Rights Act and how it kind of originated. Most of the people that were very outspoken in that originated from this camp early in the 60s.
Yes.
And so it's a fascinating momentum. But so there's a strong shift towards, look, society is, in some sense, the mechanism which disables. But there is also a very strong voice still there of, well, yes, and there is a physical condition which also disables. Within Christianity, there seems to be kind of a position that I've seen kind of across the spectrum of some people going, yes, of course, people who are not neurotypical, for example, are entirely welcome as they are, and that's great, and that's whatever. But then other people saying, well, yes, but on some level, this affects their lifestyle, and should we heal them? A great example might be the deaf community, which is very much often a strong community in itself. It finds a lot of identity in its in the fact that they can't hear in a typical sense, in a common sense, and actually. I've heard stories when I was in the charismatic world, almost a cautionary tale about praying for people that are deaf, because I heard a story from that was shared. I think it was a testimony of someone that was deaf that got healed, whatever people believe about healing listening to this, and then didn't really have their community anymore. They kind of lost their community. They didn't integrate in the community anymore. Do you think that it is an either or within this conversation, that the medical model is kind of on the way out and we're going to start embracing the social model? Or do you think it's a bit more complex than that? I don't know. I'm very ignorant in this world. So I'm intrigued to hear what you think about that.
It's an interesting question. As I look at the church, I just find myself thinking, the medical model isn't going anywhere soon.
Right.
There's this. It'll be dominant despite what people say. And as you were talking about that particular group of people given their freedom. Of course, we're focused on what society and what others do to disabled people. And this is where I'll get controversial with disabled people, is, have we done enough to help ourselves? We are the Cinderella, it's fair to say, of the liberation justice areas. And part of that is because we haven't been coherent in the sense that actually within the disability world there's been rivalry between different types. And certainly I know amongst blind people there is this wrongly, in my opinion, held idea that people who are wheelchair users are the dominant people and everybody else is other. So you've even got othering within the disability movement.
Sure. Almost like a ranking or something. Is that kind of
ranking, deserving and undeserving? And of course, COVID's split that right open with all this vulnerability and non-vulnerability. They use that sort of terminology. Now, I wasn't classed as vulnerable, but I was made vulnerable by the fact that I couldn't get my own shopping when I wanted to, or use the online facilities because other people were snagging it up. So then it became who's more deserving than others. So I thought, I'm falling into this cesspit here. So we haven't helped our case by othering one another. We don't have the history that race campaigns do. There's no MLK figure. There are a lot of there are very good figures, particularly in the world of academia, but there isn't that history. There are stories to be told, but there isn't that history. And because most of those of us who were born with something were, until the mid-80s, institutionalized. So I was sent away to a special school, for example, where I had to stay. And fortunately, I went home at weekends. A lot of folk didn't. terms spent away from their family, which creates all sorts of other dysfunctions.
Yeah.
But then you all your needs, our needs of equipment until recently were provided by charity. And it was charities that helped you out. So you're in this world. Not only were you institutionalized, but you're the sort of subject of charity. Now, of course, church feeds into that because we are the greatest charitable thing going, and we offer a charity mode to people in a rather old-fashioned way, where even within charities, within mission organizations, those who are doing farming and agricultural work, for example, are enabling people to do it themselves. It's enablement rather than charity.
Right.
And so I think sometimes as disabled people, we've settled for charity when we should have been asking for enablement. Maybe because we didn't know any better. And I think as eyes are opened within the disability field, that actually it's enablement that's required, not charity.
Yeah.
And if any charity is involved, the church needs to be enabling people, not doing for people. So, that then raises the whole pastoral care system within churches is modelled on shepherd sheep. Nothing in essence wrong with that. It's one metaphor among a whole myriad of others, but isn't all pastoral care about enablement?
Yeah.
But the trouble is when you do, yes, you're there, yes, you're the safety. I'm not saying that you don't put the work in and all the rest of it, but your goal is enablement, enabling people to reach their God-given destiny.
Yeah.
And I was reminded of a lovely quote by somebody called James Finley, who works with with the Centre of Action and Contemplation, that love is our origin, our ground, and our destiny. So surely as churches, we enable people to fulfill their destiny, which is to learn how to love.
Yeah.
And in doing so, that's when we iron out all the stuff that's been chucked at us, the stuff that we've imbibed, but we're enabling folk to be free.
Yeah.
But actually, at every level, church still the pastoral thing is what the other word I used instead of enabling, doing for charity.
Charity. Yeah.
We still do things too charitably, rather than enabling people.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. That was one of the main kind of themes of the documentary my wife and I saw, and I just thought, gosh, this is such a it was just phenomenal to see people that were, I mean, I don't come across the movement standing up and demanding of society a better standard, a better position of equality today, never mind what they were doing in it was about the mid 80s, I believe, maybe the late 80s, and it was only into the 90s that it really kind of came about.
That was a heyday in American disability history, 80s and 90s, and it was sort of was here. I think we've gone backwards slightly.
Right. Yeah. But it's just
they were the heady days.
Yeah. Well, it's just incredible to see people going, look, I'm not looking for your charity. I'm not looking for a little handout. What I want is to be able to, and you saw people rise to positions of political power. You saw people, in the Senate, in the House, doing, giving amazing speeches and persuading powerful politicians. And you go, that is what should be the right of any citizen of a country, is to make their voice heard and to be represented well and equally. And yet, generally speaking, up until then, gosh, you were lucky if we put you in an institution and just made sure you didn't die. That was kind of our base default. And I was like, oh my God, and the dates on these things shock you. I remember going online and looking up when the first kind of Disability Act in the UK was afterwards. I can't remember the date now. And I was appalled, because I was utterly, but again, it's not my world. So I couldn't believe it was so late though. It's just like, gosh, this feels like it's decades and decades after it should have been.
It was still the 50s and 60s, even in this country, that unmarried women
Yeah.
We're having babies. We're institutionalized. It's not that far back.
It's crazy. And I think in some senses, as appalled as we are by so many of the inequalities and problems that we face in our society, especially in so many of them seeming to reemerge in the last kind of decade or so, I think that is a deeply encouraging thing to me sometimes as well, to go, gosh, how far we've come at the same time. We have moved a great deal forward, and while there's so many holding us back, there is still so much momentum. Is that something that you've seen? You mentioned, only was a few years when someone within the Baptist Union was saying to you, "We are so sorry that we've realized the way we dealt with you was very unhelpful, not very professional, not very equal. It was discriminatory." Is that a thing that you are seeing change in the church, as much as you're discouraged by maybe society as a whole, and you want to see change? Have you seen a great change?
To be fair, I have, because I'm a leader. And I put myself about a bit. Maybe I should phrase that differently. I take every opportunity to be an influencer. I mean, I understand very well why so many of your. I mean, I'm in your groups. You send me the emails. I give my few quid a month, so I know the sort of people you're with, and I know why they've left church. I've chosen to stay because I'm a cussed awkward sod. I don't have the wounds. To be fair, I don't have the wounds, and if I do, they're so deep. Whatever, don't know.
Yeah,
I don't have them. Right, so so I choose to stay in because I have not. I think, well, maybe I'm just a masochist, but I think that these things can be sorted out. But I do see changes. I do see changes, and it's linked with people's changes as how they understand God too.
Yeah.
So yes, I did deliberately seek positions on. I was on the Baptist Union Governing Council for a while. I didn't do much for the first few years, but I was just present, like a bad smell. But being present, you then make friendships, and then friendships lead to other network. So as friendships were developed, friendship is the word. If friendship's the cure, if you're gonna be cure, make friends. Once I started making friendships, then they started getting into networks, and then I played. Yes, I did. All right, I played the game, but I knew what I was doing. I didn't go into it blindly. I thought, well, I knew who the people were to press. And so I did, and my peers have never had a problem with me. In ministers' gatherings and stuff, they've never had a problem with me. I go to academic gatherings, they don't have a problem with me, because the same people. It just organically happens through friendship. You've just got to get to the place where the friendships happen, and that's where it doesn't happen. So there is a sea change, but that's also to do with the sea change of how people perceive God. The Spirit is blowing in two different directions in this country at the moment. They are the ones who are longing for old-fashioned revival, and they'll claim their evidence. But I think in movements such as yours and others, the Spirit's still blowing. There's this discontented, angry, hurt group of people are getting their message through. And those like me who deliberately, might I say, straddle both worlds. Although I don't have the hurt. I want to hear the hurt. I want to feel it. So that I can do something about it. So it's maybe not the right way to go about it, but I just want to absorb. I think because the Spirit's blowing through people like that. I think
Yeah.
you're showing us a different sort of God, and I think folk are catching on.
Yeah.
So the seed change is coming through the changing attitudes, because people like me are putting themselves about a bit.
Yeah.
But it's also coming through people's, particularly those who are a bit younger and more open. People, a lot of folk, there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the old ways of seeing God. It's just leaders aren't brave because they're frightened. We're frightened we're going to get our living taken away, for goodness sake.
Yeah. It's very understandable. Very understandable.
I am sitting in a room that is provided for me. Step too much out of line, you're out the street.
You won't be on the room.
There's no room at all. But there's all sorts of folk who approach me and say, my Facebook page is an open book, and there are all sorts of folk finding their way to me who are looking for that. We thought we were alone.
Yeah.
We thought we were by ourselves, and so this sea change as far as disability and every other justice issue is happening because people are changing and are opening themselves up to a different sort of God.
Yeah. It's definitely a huge movement. There's no question about it. I spent about 10 years kind of straddling as well. And so as someone that knows how difficult that can be, I honestly take my hat off to you and think, thank you so much, because I think there is a deep, deep need for people that are aware of what this looks like for those that end up othered, what this looks like for those that are shifting radically and aren't at home in the church anymore, or whatever that looks like. But there is a need for the change within, and I think many churches will change. I think many churches won't change as well, and they'll probably die. Honestly, give them 50 years, and they probably won't be around, or there'll be a lot fewer. But I do think a lot of churches will change. I mean, history has taught us that churches change. And so I think it's really important that we have people like yourself. You mentioned the Center for Contemplation and Prayer, Contemplation and Action, the Richard Rohr's movement. He's a great example of someone that he talks about being on the edge of the circle. So he's still in the circle, but he's right on the edge. And it's like, how can I still influence the circle? How can I still be a part of the circle? But I'm so close to the edge. I'm also helping people on the out. And I'm even helping some people move from one side of the circle to the other. Whichever direction they need to go, it's okay. And I think it's important to have people like that, people that act as bridges.
I think I'm the most comfortable I've been all my life in terms of my relationship with the church. I no longer.
That's beautiful.
I'm no longer involved with the governing things of a denomination now.
Yeah.
I think I'm at a position where I don't need to do that. I don't need to play the game. I'm better off on the edge.
Yeah.
I want to be at the margin.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful, Glenn, and I really love it. I so appreciate people like you. Yeah,
it's a good place to be. And so I do gather around me the people who influence me, the people I befriend these days, virtually, who are speaking into my life, are those who are on the edge too.
That's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Yeah. Glenn, I want to be sensitive to your time. We've probably got at most another kind of 20, 15 minutes, but I'd love for you to maybe share some. So I'm sure there's people that were listening along to this thinking, gosh, this is a world that I am not aware of, or this is a world I want to, if I have been somewhat aware of, I want to be a lot more aware of. How can I do better? People that are within the church, people just generally. Do you have some resources that you would point people towards that are great educational resources and how they can be doing better in dealing with ableism, being aware of disability, creating safe places for disability, enabling people who have disabilities rather than just offering just that charity? Do you think you've got any resources that would be top kind of picks for you?
I think before we get to resources, I think the first sort of the two big things folk could be doing right away is befriending. Be a friend. Get that word friend into your heads. God as friend, everybody as friend. The church is a society of friends. yeah, I think that's one thing I just like, drip in again.
Yeah.
And the second thing is ask questions, no matter how embarrassing. I would encourage people to ask the questions.
Great.
How do you have sex? I mean, however stupid they sound, they're better asked than not asked. No matter how ridiculous, be prepared for the odd grumpy person who might give you a bit of feedback. You won't get any from me. You might get a bit of jovial.
I presume it's best to do those two things in that order. That if you ask someone, how do you have sex? It's easier if you've become a friend to them.
I did them in the order that I described.
Yeah.
Befriend and ask, but don't be embarrassed to ask the questions, because people would rather you knew.
Yeah. No,
even if it does bring a bit of embarrassment, people would ask you knew. Now, in terms of resources, I don't know so much about the American scene, really, if most of your audience are American.
Well, a good portion of, but I'm sure that there'll be
but in this country, I mean, I mentioned there are a couple of things. There's an organisation called Disability and Jesus. Disability and Jesus. You type those into a search engine, they come up on Twitter and they come up on Facebook, mainly on Twitter. It's great to interact with them because they are the people who've left church.
Wow.
Or if they are in church, they're very much on the margins. They've gathered up a lot of angry people that clergy folk like me can't touch. Because, of course, we're sometimes seen as the enemy too. And because we've sold our souls to the system, so they've gathered around themselves this group, just to hear their stories, to hear the pain is just an exercise that I treat myself to every now and then, in case I get smug. I just to remind myself there are the folks that aren't reached who are angry and hurting. And they do produce a lot of good, down-to-earth resources. Disability and Jesus.
Great.
The other place, there's two others I'd visit. The second place I'd connect with is, I mentioned earlier on, I'm privileged enough to chair the network called Churches for All, and its website is www.churchesforall.org. www.churchesforall.org. There you will have links to resources, to charities and other groups. It's the one-stop shop for everything in Britain to do with Christianity and disability.
Brilliant.
It will take you to the places where you want to go. That's www.churchesforall.org.
Brilliant.
And the third one, particularly for people who are in the learning disability, autistic spectrum, is another online. Now, here is, of course, more or less the common thread is online, that actually this new movement is being mobilized online. There's something to be said about that. The ex-church movement, which is why I like hanging out in sites like yours, is this online. I think whatever else one wants to leave behind by church, there's still a thirst for community.
There is, absolutely.
And I think the online stuff is quenching that thirst. And like every movement, it's got to have the angry phase. You've got to have the immature rage phase. Every it's said of new monastic communities. I'm very interested in the new monastic scene. That every new monasticism is immature, yet seeking grounding. It's recognizing that immaturity, anger, all that is the phases that must be held and must not be suppressed. But there must always be the opening that they will eventually transcend. It has to start with that. I'm rambling. The third one is another online grassroots movement. and it's called the Additional Needs Alliance, and they operate mainly off Facebook.
Okay.
And it was set up by activist parents and disabled people, but people in that sort of, autistic and other spectrum. And it just gathers momentum, and they do a lot of training too. Yes. They're a good place to go to. Additional Needs Alliance as well.
Brilliant.
So they'd be the places. Certainly, I'd go to in this country.
Brilliant. No, that's wonderful. I'll make sure to leave notes in the show notes to links to those different things. And so, if people are interested in tracking with you and what you do, are you active on social media? Is there a place that you would recommend people kind of track to follow you, to message you, anything like that?
Well, at the moment, I've just got my own FB page, which is Glen C. Graham.
Okay.
And it has a picture of dog on. So if a dog asks you to be your friend, it's me. That's the main place. I do have a Twitter account, but it's a much more private one I share with my wife. Which,
okay.
I don't read all and sundry. And there is a Churches for All Facebook page.
Okay.
And there is the Baptist Union Disability Justice Group page as well.
Okay.
I suspect that in time I am developing in time a platform on Patreon.
Okay, nice.
So if ever I leave the church formally, I'm looking into setting up a place where I do online teaching on matters of faith, Bible, philosophy, history, disability stuff, Celtic new monastic stuff, contemplative stuff. All of that would be included coaching. I'm trying to establish a coaching and spiritual directing group. And when that does go running, it'll be called Enabling Pilgrim. And that awesome. that title sums me up, really. What you asked what I was about. I should have come up with this right at the beginning. If ever I set myself up in business, it will call itself Enabling Pilgrim. Because whether it's ministry, whether it's in a church, whether it's spiritual direction, whether it's life coaching, whether it's teaching and lecturing, it's all about enabling people. I love that. I love the image of us being pilgrims because it's so open-ended.
Yeah.
It's so wild, adventurous. The destination doesn't count for how you get there is as equal. It's unsettled. It's always full of churn. It's always full of what's the next thing. So what I'm about is helping folk along their pilgrimage and enabling them to be the people who they were meant to be, and that we would learn love, because love is our origin, love is our ground, and love is our destination.
It's beautiful.
Seems a good place to land to me.
That sounds amazing to me. Absolutely. So you need to let me know when you do launch your Patreon, and I'll definitely give that a plug as well.
Thank you.
So keen to keep you in that room, you know. So, but that's beautiful. And
in time, I want to semi-retire and just keep my fingers in the pie.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm doing some local work, but mainly, I'm thinking that there will come a time when my energy will be, well, I really want to do. Do I really want to do the things I'm passionate about? And that is really the spiritual directing, the teaching, and the all the sort of justice stuff. And I am working with just 2 or 3 weeks' time, where a group of us are doing we've managed to get all the National Baptist area leaders into one Zoom room for some racial training. And they've asked me to come along to be part of it. Because everybody says I'm colorblind. When you're trying to be woke about these things, I'm colorblind. I'm doing a bit I actually am colourblind, but I'm not.
Yeah.
About how other ways you know, actually it isn't necessarily colour that can trigger. Other narratives do. So I'm trying to get them to get below the surface. That I thought would be great. So, you know, all that sort of, that's where the passions are.
Yeah.
You know, I began ministry, local church. I thought that was it. That was all one could and should do. But the trouble is, life has moved on, and who knows where things are going to take one. But we are where we are, and
it's exciting, very exciting.
Exciting.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Glenn, gosh, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. I really do. It's been a real privilege. It's been enlightening, very educational for me. Right from the offset, you set about and educating me on my own tradition as well. So growing up in a Baptist church, I didn't know half of it. So
it's actually a model. You know, this is what I do. This is you know what if you were in my front room now. This is how I'd deal with you.
Well, we would have this. If you came round to my house, we would have had this conversation. Glenn. This is what I love. People are like, oh, how do you have these podcast conversations? I'm like, this is what I would do. If we went out to the pub with any of the people on the podcast show, this is the conversation we'd have on the whole. Maybe slightly adapted to explain to an audience here or there. But I have these conversations either way.
The only thing that was missing was the scotch.
I know. Well, if it wasn't, 2 p.m, a lot of my podcasts I end up doing with people on the West Coast of America, and I'll book it in at like midnight my time. So scotch might be a bit more palatable then, but 2 p.m, not quite.
I'm up late. I could have done you at midnight. I should have thought of that.
Oh, there we go. If we have you back on at some point, we'll do a midnight session.
The midnight hour.
We'll get some scotch out. Yeah.